We will finish this amazing chapter by looking at disorders of the neurodevelopment. Unfortunately, autism has become quite popular in our society. This is a major complex neurological disorder that is difficult to define because the cases vary significantly. In fact, this is often considered a spectrum disorder. We have autism spectrum disorders, and we have Asperger's syndrome, which is a mild autism spectrum disorder in which cognitive and linguistic functions are well preserved. Typically, this is apparent before the age of 3, but typically does not increase in severity after that age. Now, there are 3 core symptoms of this in here. We have reduced ability to interpret emotions, the reduced capacity for social interaction. They may not, depending on the severity of it, they may not be able to make eye contact or interact with people. And also preoccupation with a single subject or activity. And that's where we see a lot of repetitive behavior. When individuals look at the behavior of these individuals and say, well, you're just doing that because you like it and you just choose to do so, please keep in mind that that is actually coming from the brain. And so we look specifically at this. Intensive behavioral therapy may improve function, but we find that there is a level of brain damage and dysfunction that varies. The incidence of autism is 6.6 per every 1,000 births, or 1 in 166 people. We do see that males are more affected than females. 80% of individuals with autism are autistic, and 60% of them have mental retardation, whereas 35% of them have epileptic seizures, and 25% have little or no language ability. Despite these deficiencies, the majority of individuals with autism have abilities that are preserved. For example, they have rote memory, and rote basically a habitual repetition of something that needs to be learned. And oftentimes this makes them very successful at specific fields. Their ability to also solve jigsaw puzzles, musical ability, or artistic abilities are not unusual. In fact, we have what's known as autistic savants, and these are individuals who are intellectually handicapped but display very specific cognitive or artistic abilities that are impressive. There are approximately 1 out of 10 autistic individuals who display savant abilities, and we believe that this may be the consequence of compensating for functional improvement in one area that's followed damage to another. Think of individuals who sometimes lose their ability to see but develop an impressive sense of hearing, and through the sound they're able to navigate through areas. Think of autistic savants in a similar fashion. Whereas they may not be able to excel in certain aspects, they are able to excel in others. The genetic basis of autism spectrum disorder cannot be negated. Prior to 2015, we used to think that siblings of children with autism had a 5% chance of having autism themselves. But as of 2015, we found that there is now about a 20% chance of being diagnosed with the disorder if a sibling has this. This is well above the rate in the general population, but well below the 50% chance that would be expected if autism spectrum disorder were caused solely by a single dominant gene. Also, if one monozygotic twin is diagnosed, that is to say a twin that was born from the same sperm and same egg, and then eventually they separated into 2, then there's a 60% chance of receiving the same diagnosis. These findings suggest that autism spectrum disorder is triggered by several genes interacting with the environment. Several dozen genes have already been implicated, and in less than 5% of autism spectrum disorder cases, there is a single gene mutation that can account for the disorder. The symptoms of autism spectrum disorder are very different. We find that there may be some deficits in behavior functions, but not in others. And this suggests that there may be alterations to some neural structures while leaving the other structures intact. In addition, we find that there are differences in the symptoms that are displayed by various patients, and this would suggest that there are some similar variabilities from case to case, and the underlying neural correlates. Looking specifically at the complex situation, we find that there are large systematic studies that are needed so that we can understand which neural parts are associated with specific symptoms of autism spectrum disorder. There have been several modern and structural studies that have involved only a few individuals, and they have focused on specifically the cerebellum, the amygdala, and the frontal cortex. Unfortunately, there is little agreement on to the nature of the differences between the two or how they develop. There are two lines of research on the involvement of the cortex and with individuals with autism, and one of them is the neural mechanisms that have focused on atypical reaction of individuals with ASD2 faces. And that is to say that individuals with autism spend less time than typical looking at faces, especially the eyes, and they also remember faces less well. Through fMRI studies, they found that the fusiform face area, which you remember from chapter 6, which is responsive to faces, had little activity in comparison to individuals who do not have autism. The second line of research would be on the possibility of deficiency in mirror neuron functions. And by mirror neurons, again, we're going back into territory that has been debated quite aggressively in the last decade or so as to whether humans have mirror neurons. We know they've been found in chimps and other species, but we have no confirmation that they exist in humans. But if they do exist, there could be a possibility in the deficiency in which the individuals would not be imitating what the adults are doing, and hence bringing about these behavioral differences.